I'm going to talk to you today about some opportunities and challenges in the life sciences space. As Trevor mentioned, this is the start of National Biotech Week. And by the way, Trevor, you cheated because it actually officially starts tomorrow. So that's how you became the first. You know, next year I'm going to have an event on the 18th. Just so you can't do that again. Sorry, my clicker's not working here, but I'll just use the computer. Is that okay now? All right. So Life Sciences Ontario. We started out as a grassroots organization in Toronto called the Toronto Biotech Initiative. Over time, our mandate expanded beyond the boundaries of Toronto. So a very clever bit of marketing, they changed the name to the Biotech Initiative so they could keep the TBI acronym. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we changed our name again to Life Sciences Ontario. And a couple of reasons for that name change. One is we are a provincial organization. We're not rooted in Toronto anymore, although that's where we had our base. And life sciences is a broader term that we use to define the sector. And I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about this later in my presentation. But when we say life sciences, we're not just talking about human health sciences. We're talking about industrial biotechnology and agri-food technologies as well. We represent a lot of different stakeholders in the life sciences space. We really have 3 categories of members. First are our partners, and most of these are other organizations, not-for-profits, that are operating within the life sciences space in Ontario, and they see value in speaking with one strong, unified voice. We are a very segmented and fragmented industry in past times, so LSO is trying to pull these organizations together. I used to use the term that we're an umbrella organization, but people thought I was trying to take over the world. So now I use the term we're an upside-down umbrella organization, meaning that all of these companies, we're creating a platform for advocacy. So it's to strengthen the position of all of these organizations. We have about 30 or so of these types of partners. We are a fully member-funded organization. We do not receive ongoing support from the government. We do on occasion do projects on their behalf, but on a project basis, but operationally we are fully independent. In part because of our corporate members. These are the guys that with the big bucks that pay our bills. And again, see value in us being a strong voice and advocate for the industry in Ontario. And we have large firms, small firms, service providers, academic institutions. We're up to about 60 or so of these corporate members. Just before I leave that slide, the third category is what we call individual members. Because of privacy issues, I won't list them here, but those are individuals that are students, that are studying in areas of life sciences. They are researchers. They are employees of various companies, whether they're corporate members or not, that see value in what we do, volunteer their time and effort to the organization. And we have about 100 or so individual members. We are a provincial organization, but our reach is definitely beyond the province of Ontario. We work very closely with the National Association, Biotech Canada, and they have what's called a National Biotech Accord, which we are a part of. And that links us in with the other industry associations across Canada. We also have a unique partnership with the province of Quebec. And a few years back, the respective governments of Ontario and Quebec said we were going to have an economic trade agreement. And one of the first initiatives they launched was something called a life sciences corridor. Because of the concentration of life sciences industries, academic institutes, and research within this corridor across Ontario and Quebec, it was an opportunity to create what's called a meta-cluster. And there's other examples of these types of meta-clusters. Sweden and Denmark is one great example that's well known. They branded it as Metacon Valley, and they've achieved great success. And much like Sweden and Denmark, Ontario and Quebec are competitive. We do compete for investment in the space. So it took a lot of work to actually build a relationship with our counterparts in Quebec. I remember the first meeting, I think my first week on the job at LSO, and I flew out and met with the folks at Biopolis-Quebec. It was the most tense meeting I've ever had in my life. You know, everybody was feeling each other out, and by the end of the day, we realized we were facing the same challenges, some of the same frustrations with interacting with our respective governments. We've built a lot of trust. And to date, we've actually done 4 joint policy papers to the federal government on key issues. I've had other industry associations in other sectors come to me and say, how have you been able to do this with Quebec? We can't even talk to the other association in Quebec. So I'm really proud of this relationship that we've managed to build with the province of Quebec. I described to you how we define life sciences, and it is consistent with how Biotech Canada views life sciences. It's also consistent with how other jurisdictions define life sciences. It's not consistent with how the Government of Ontario views life sciences. This chart actually shows how the Biotechnology Industry Association in the US, which is the largest industry association, biotech association in the world, views life sciences, and they view all areas of agriculture, drugs, pharma, med devices, and along the value chain, and use that when they drive statistics. In Ontario, if you go to the economic development and trade industry, this is what they see as life sciences. It's basically drugs and medical devices. And because of that, we actually face a huge challenge in terms of our advocacy position, because at the end of the day, they view the sector as very small and insignificant, yet they're spending a lot of money in basic research. You know, the elephant in the room is obviously our healthcare budget. It's 50% of our budget. So life sciences is oftentimes viewed as a cost to government rather than a contribution. And so this slide kind of illustrates in basic forms the equation that they see huge costs, little return on investment. Part of that is because of the metrics they're using from an economic perspective. You all know who I am, so I'll just take that off. But the other part and the end piece and the question mark I have there is around the socioeconomic impacts and how do you measure that? So life sciences, we don't make cars that pollute the environment. We don't make video games that make our kids obese. We make the technologies that feed a growing global population. We create technologies and innovations that allow renewable materials, clean fuels, therapeutics that treat our sick and create a productive workforce. How do you put a value on the social impacts of our sector? It's a good question, and it's a question that a lot of people are struggling with and one that we need to raise more awareness around. So when speaking with government, one of the key messages that I have for them is if you think about all the challenges that the government faces, the social challenges, there's no other sector out there outside of life sciences that is better aligned to meet these challenges through the adoption of innovations. One of the topics that's coming up more and more prevalent, and again, it falls in this category, is youth unemployment. And as an academic institution, and talking with the folks from CBB today, this is obviously a concern, and Waterloo is definitely making some great strides in some of the programs that you're running in terms of encouraging entrepreneurship. But you're unique. This is not widespread, and it's been really frustrating for me as I've been engaged with government, both at the federal level and the provincial level, when we're talking about this issue. For the last 20 or 30 years, we've been promoting higher education, we've been promoting STEM education in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and we have reaped the benefits of that. We have the highest educated young workforce in the world. Number one in the OECD in tertiary education attainment. Yet when you talk to government about the youth unemployment issue, they're talking about skills trades. These PhDs, these BScs, these master's students, they don't want to go back and become welders and plumbers and electricians to go work in the oil sands, right? They want to do research. They want to make innovative technologies. So we need to focus on creating opportunities for entrepreneurship and create businesses in this space. And this is really just a summary of that. We're very strong in education, basic research, in terms of innovation. Where we're falling down is actually translating these into real socioeconomic benefits in companies and commercial successes. And one of the biggest barriers to this is access to capital. I actually just changed the slide today. Prior to this, I had a slide on here that showed venture capital. And it was a good slide, but Ontario didn't even register on it. I mean, it was really basically just showed other jurisdictions were here, and Ontario was like a blip. You could barely see it. But I think this is a much more telling slide because it really shows, and give credit where credit is due, this is from the 2013 Ernst & Young Beyond Borders report, and they call this their survival index. They do this every year. It really shows what life sciences companies and biotech companies are faced with in Ontario and in Canada. More than half, 53% of our Canadian biotech companies have less than 1 year of cash. Where do you think they're spending their time? It's not commercializing technologies. It's not doing research. It's wondering how they're going to pay their researchers from day to day. How is the company going to survive 6 months down the line? That's what's taking up their time. That's what's taking up their focus. And compared to other jurisdictions in Europe and the US where it's a third, it really puts us at a disadvantage. So access to capital is a key issue. Government does have a role to play there in terms of incentives. Again, areas of frustration before McGuinty left office. Of course, there was a promise of an angel tax credit, and it didn't materialize. And there's other incentives across the board. We're very strong in mining because of the flow-through share model, and we don't see that in the same sort of support or incentives by government in life sciences. Another thing that's particularly interesting when you look at successful jurisdictions, and I'm just going to point to the middle section here, a long-term government commitment. And one of the jurisdictions that's done this particularly well is Massachusetts. So what Massachusetts has done, a few years ago they announced $1 billion life sciences fund. That sounds like a lot of money. It's $1 billion over 10 years. So, but it was less about the quantity of the money, and actually the 10 years was actually the impressive part of that. Why? Because it was beyond a 4-year political cycle, right? So the message that sends to the industry globally is that this jurisdiction, regardless of the governing power, is committed to developing this sector in the space. The other thing that was really unique about this was they were really smart about how they spent the money. They coordinated it really well. They said, okay, these are our levers, grants, financing, tax incentives. This is the industry across the board from universities to early stage right to mature companies. And then they mapped in gray all the federal programs, and they said, okay, we're going to fill the gaps with that $1 billion. They're going to coordinate the funding. Why can't Ontario do that? We spend more than $100 million a year in support for innovation, but it's a hodgepodge and patchwork of programs that aren't coordinated. And I think this message is starting to resonate a little bit. I actually had a very opportune moment down in Chicago this year at Bio when one of the assistant deputy ministers came to me and he was holding a package from Mass Bio. And he said, oh, you should see their booth. It's terrific. They got great information, whatever. I said, give me that package. And I took it out of his hand, flipped through it, hoping this chart was in there. And I had this pitch to him, and he went, oh, yeah. And you could see the light bulb go on. So it's one of the messages we continue to send. So just to summarize, from an advocacy perspective, access to capital, number one issue facing the sector. Education and awareness about who we are as a sector, the size, the scope, I think is really important. And then again, a coordinated support for innovation. I've talked a lot about the challenges that we're facing as an industry. So I do want to end on a positive note, or maybe a semi-positive note. This is a quote from Dr. Mark Poznansky from Ontario Genomics Institute. He also was awarded our Lifetime Achievement Award at our Gala Awards this past year. And Mark is a very insightful guy, and he's a very optimistic guy. And he wrote, this was part of his annual report from the OGI, where he wrote it from a futuristic perspective looking back. But I think he's onto something. I really believe that we're faced right now in a fundamental paradigm shift in the life sciences sector. And it's not because we're going to have a miracle of the leadership in our government and province all of a sudden say, hey, this sector makes sense, and we're going to invest in it. But it's going to be driven out of necessity. The healthcare system is unsustainable at 50% a year. They have to change the way that they're adopting innovation and procuring innovation. And we're already starting to see signs that that fundamental shift is going to take place. And that's going to have a trickle-down effect in terms of how we commercialize technologies. And the other key driver is going to be the young people that we have, the highly educated workforce that is facing double the unemployment rates of the average, right? These are smart kids that have resources that we didn't have before. They're innovative, and they're going to find ways to get over those high barriers of entry to entrepreneurship. And I believe that that's going to be a key to success as well in the life sciences industry. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for your time, and LSO will continue to advocate on behalf of this sector and all of you.